This story begins 3 months earlier, in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, where Marco Valentino was learning once again that no woman could handle him. "I can't do this anymore." Vanessa stood by his bedroom door, her designer dress barely covering her model-thin frame, tears streaming down her perfect face. "I tried, Marco. God knows I tried." Marco sat on the edge of his California king bed, all 6 foot 8 inches and 280 pounds of him, and felt the familiar weight of disappointment settle in his chest. "What happened this time? What happened?" Vanessa's voice cracked. "Look at you. You're massive. Every time we're together, I'm terrified. Not just in bed, though that's part of it. I physically can't handle you. It hurts, Marco. Everything with you hurts. And it's not just the physical stuff. It's the danger, the violence, the way men look at me like I'm a possession instead of a person. I wake up every morning wondering if today's the day someone uses me to get to you. I've protected you. That's not a life. Being protected, being guarded, being afraid to go to the grocery store without armed men following me. I wanted the fantasy, Marco. The power and the money and the prestige. But the reality? I can't survive it. I'm not strong enough." She left without another word. The door clicked shut with a finality that Marco had heard too many times before. He stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city he controlled but couldn't share with anyone who mattered. His phone buzzed. His consigliera, Tony. "Boss, I heard Vanessa left. You okay?"
Ivy fine.
"It's always the same story, Tony. They're attracted to the power, they want the lifestyle, but when they realize what it actually means to be with me, they can't handle it. And I'm not even talking about the business. I'm talking about me. Physically, emotionally. I'm too much. Too big, too intense, too everything. You just haven't met the right woman. Maybe there is no right woman. Maybe I'm meant to be alone." "Don't talk like that, boss. Your no-no would kill you." Marco smiled despite himself. His grandmother, the matriarch of the Valentino family, had one dying wish: to see him settled and happy before she passed. At 87, time was running out. "Nona still thinks I'm an import-export. And we're keeping it that way. Listen, boss, forget Vanessa. She wasn't the one. When you meet her, you'll know." Marco hung up and returned to staring at the city. He didn't believe in fairy tales anymore. He'd stopped believing in them around the fifth woman who'd walked away, terrified of the man she'd begged to be with. 3 hours later, everything changed. Marco was meeting with a supplier in a warehouse in Queens when the deal went sideways. Guns appeared. Bullets flew. Marco felt the impact in his shoulder, the hot bloom of pain, and then he was being dragged to his SUV by his men while everything went hazy around the edges. "Hospital," he managed.
"Now."
"Boss, we've got a doctor on payroll who can patch you up at the safe house."
"No."
"Real hospital. I'm dying, Tony. I can feel it." They burst through the doors of New York Presbyterian at 2:47 in the morning, 6 men in blood-soaked suits carrying a giant who was rapidly bleeding out. The ER was chaos, people screaming, nurses backing away from the weapons Tony's men were barely concealing. And then she appeared. Before we continue, please click the subscribe button, like this video, and leave a comment. This lets us know you're following the story. She was small. That was Marco's first thought through the haze of pain. Tiny, really, wearing scrubs covered in someone else's blood, her natural hair pulled back in a ponytail, her dark skin glowing under the harsh fluorescent lights. She took one look at the scene, at his men trying to intimidate everyone, at Marco bleeding all over her clean floor, and her face transformed into something fierce. "Everyone out.
Now."
Tony stepped forward, hand moving toward his weapon. "Lady, you don't know who this is. I don't care if he's the President of the United States. In my ER, I make the rules. You want him to live? Get out of my way. You want to stand here playing gangster while he bleeds to death? That's on you." But make a choice, because he's got maybe 15 minutes before he goes into shock. She locked eyes with Marco, and he saw something he'd never seen before when a woman looked at him. No fear.
No.
Just clinical assessment and a hint of annoyance that he was bleeding on her floor. You, she said, pointing at him. How much blood have you lost? A lot, Marco managed. Helpful. Can you tell me where you were shot? Shoulder. Hurts like hell. I'm sure it does. Sir, get your men out of my ER, or I call security and the police. Your choice. Marco made the call, through gritted teeth. Everyone out.
Do what she says.
They left reluctantly. The doctor was already moving, barking orders at her staff, stripping away his blood-soaked shirt with efficient movements. Her hands probed the wound, and Marco couldn't stop the grunt of pain. Bullet nicked your subclavian artery. You're lucky to be conscious. What's your name?
Marco. Marco Valentino.
Well, Marco Valentino, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Monroe, and I'm about to save your life. You have any allergies I should know about?
No.
But I can't go under. I need to stay conscious. Her eyes, deep brown and sharp as scalpels, met his. You want to feel me digging a bullet out of your shoulder? I have enemies. I can't be vulnerable. You're already vulnerable. You're bleeding out on my table. But fine, tough guy. Local anesthetic only. Fair warning, this is going to hurt worse than anything you've ever felt. I can handle pain.
We'll see about that.
Try not to scream. It upsets the other patients. She wasn't gentle, because there wasn't time for gentle. Elizabeth worked with a focused intensity of someone who'd done this 100 times, her hands steady even when Marco's massive frame shuddered with pain. She talked while she worked, partly to distract him, partly because silence made the pain worse. So, Marco Valentino, you have a reputation. Should I be worried that treating you will put a target on my back? I'll protect you. I don't need protection from a man who can't even protect himself. How'd you get shot anyway? Business deal gone wrong. Something like that. Let me guess. Import-export. Despite the agony, Marco almost smiled. How'd you know? Because every gangster I've treated says the same thing. You're not special, Mr. Valentino. You're just another Tuesday night in my ER. You treat a lot of gangsters? I treat everyone. Gangsters, cops, innocent bystanders caught in your crossfire. I don't discriminate. Blood is blood. You're not afraid of me. Elizabeth looked up from her work, and for a moment, their eyes met and held. Should I be? You're just a man who made bad choices and now has a hole in his shoulder.
That's all you are to me.
No one talks to me like that. Maybe they should. Might keep you from ending up on my table. She pulled the bullet free with a sharp tug that made Marco see stars. Got it. Now, let's make sure you don't bleed to death while I stitch you up. Her hands moved over his skin, stitching with practiced ease. Marco watched her face, the concentration, the way she bit her lower lip when she was focusing. He'd been with beautiful women before. Models, actresses, socialites. But this woman, this tiny, fierce doctor, who looked at him like he was just another problem to solve, she was different. You're married? He asked. That's none of your business. No ring. Still none of your business. Boyfriend. Mr. Valentino, less talking, more not dying. I'm trying to save your life here.
Why?
If I'm just another gangster, why not let me bleed? Elizabeth's hands paused. She looked up at him, and he saw something flash in her eyes. Pain, maybe. Old wounds. Because I took an oath. Because every life matters, even the ones that probably shouldn't. Because maybe if I save you tonight, you'll go home and think about the choices that brought you here, and maybe, just maybe, you'll make better ones tomorrow. Probably not, but a girl can hope. You think I'm a bad person. I think you're a complicated person making destructive choices. There's a difference. She finished stitching and bandaged his shoulder with quick, efficient movements. You're going to need antibiotics and at least 2 weeks of rest. No strenuous activity. No getting shot. Think you can manage that? I'll try. Trying isn't good enough. Either commit to taking care of yourself or don't waste my time saving you. I have other patients who actually want to live. She stripped off her gloves and tossed them in the trash. Your men are waiting outside. Try not to bleed on my floor again. Marco sat up slowly, testing his range of motion. The pain was still there, sharp and insistent, but manageable. Thank you, Dr. Monroe. Don't thank me. Just don't come back. She turned to leave, but Marco's voice stopped her. What if I want to come back? Elizabeth turned, one eyebrow raised. Then I suggest you find a new hobby that doesn't involve bullets. Good night, Mr. Valentino. She walked away and Marco watched her go, feeling something shift inside his chest that had nothing to do with the gunshot wound. For the first time in years, he'd met a woman who wasn't impressed by his size, his power, or his reputation. A woman who looked at him and saw just a man. Just Marco. He wanted to see her again. He needed to see her again. And Marco Valentino always got what he wanted. Tony was waiting outside with the car. Boss, you okay? What did the doctor say? She said I'm an idiot who makes bad choices. Smart woman. Where to?
Home.
And Tony? Find out everything you can about Dr. Elizabeth Monroe. Everything. The next morning, Marco woke to sunlight streaming through his penthouse windows and pain radiating through his shoulder. He'd ignored Elizabeth's advice about rest and spent 3 hours on the phone managing his territory, making sure the men who'd ambushed him understood the consequences of their actions. By noon, his shoulder was throbbing and the bandage was showing spots of blood. Tony appeared in his doorway. Boss, you're bleeding through the dressing. You need to see a doctor. I have a doctor. The one who told you not to come back? That's the one. Call ahead. Tell her I need to see her. She's going to tell you to go to hell. Probably.
Call anyway.
Elizabeth was in the middle of her shift when her supervisor appeared, looking nervous. Dr. Monroe, you have a patient requesting you specifically.
Marco Valentino.
Elizabeth felt her stomach drop. Tell him I'm busy. He's insisting. And he brought his security team. They're making the other patients nervous. Elizabeth threw down her chart and marched to the waiting room. Marco was sitting in a chair that was far too small for his frame, surrounded by 4 men in expensive suits who were doing absolutely nothing to hide the weapons under their jackets. Every other patient in the waiting room was pressed against the far wall. You've got to be kidding me, Elizabeth said. You can't just show up here with an armed entourage. Marco looked up, and despite the pain in his face, he smiled. Dr. Monroe, I need your help. You need to leave. You're terrifying my patients. I'm bleeding. Then go to a different hospital. There are dozens in New York. I want you. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that had nothing to do with medicine. Elizabeth felt heat rise in her cheeks and cursed herself for the reaction. Exam room 3. Your men stay here. And if any of them pulls a weapon, I'm calling the police. Marco followed her into the exam room, his massive frame making the small space feel even smaller. Elizabeth shut the door and crossed her arms. Shirt off. Let me see the damage. Marco unbuttoned his shirt slowly, wincing with each movement. When the fabric fell away, Elizabeth saw the blood-stained bandage and the angry red skin around it. She moved closer, professional instincts overriding her irritation. You didn't rest, did you? I had business to handle. Of course you did. She carefully removed the bandage, and her breath caught. 2 of the stitches had torn open. Mr. Valentino, this is infected. You need antibiotics, possibly 4 antibiotics, and you need to actually follow my instructions. I can't rest. Not right now. There are people who see my injury as weakness, an opportunity to move against me. Then maybe you should reconsider your life choices. She cleaned the wound, none too gently, and Marco hissed through his teeth. This is going to hurt. I'm used to pain. Clearly not, or you'd be more careful about avoiding it. She restitched the torn sections, her hands steady despite the way Marco's proximity was making her pulse race. He was too big, too close, too everything. And yet, she didn't feel afraid. She felt something else entirely, something dangerous and intoxicating. Why did you really come here? She asked. I told you. I needed a doctor. You have a doctor on payroll.
Tony mentioned it last night.
So why come to me? Marco was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower, more honest. Because you're not afraid of me. Do you know how rare that is? Everyone I meet either fears me or wants something from me. But you looked at me and saw just a man with a hole in his shoulder.
I needed that.
I needed to be just Marco for a few minutes. Elizabeth's hands paused. She looked up at him, really looked, and saw past the Mafia boss to the lonely man underneath. You can't keep coming here, Marco. It's not safe. For either of us. I know. Then why are you here? Because I can't stop thinking about you. The honesty in his words knocked the breath from her lungs. Elizabeth stepped back, needing distance, needing air. That's not a good idea. I know that too. Doesn't change anything. Marco stood, towering over her, but his eyes were gentle. Have dinner with me? Absolutely not. Why not? Because you're a criminal, Marco. Because I save lives and you, from what I understand, take them. Because this, whatever this is, it can't happen. One dinner. That's all I'm asking. If you hate every second of it, I'll never bother you again. And if I don't hate it, then maybe we see where this goes. Elizabeth knew she should say no. Every rational part of her brain was screaming at her to walk away, to keep the professional boundaries firmly in place, to protect herself from the inevitable disaster that would come from getting involved with a man like Marco Valentino. But there was something in his eyes, something vulnerable and real, that made her hesitate. One dinner, she heard herself say. Somewhere public. And your security team stays outside. Marco's smile could have lit up the entire city.
Deal.
Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. I'll pick you up. I'll meet you there. And Marco? If this turns out to be a mistake, if you put me in danger or try to control my life the way I'm guessing you control everything else, I'm gone. Understood. Understood. He left, and Elizabeth stood in the exam room, wondering what she'd just agreed to. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number with an address to a restaurant in Manhattan. Below it, another message. Looking forward to tomorrow. And thank you for saving my life.
Twice. Marco.
Elizabeth stared at her phone, her heart racing. She was playing with fire, and she knew it. But for the first time in 3 years, since her fiancé had died in a drive-by shooting caught in the crossfire of gang violence, she felt something other than anger and grief. She felt alive. The next evening, Elizabeth stood in front of her closet, cursing herself for caring what she wore. It was just dinner. One dinner with a man who represented everything she'd spent her career fighting against. A man whose world had taken someone she loved. A man who made her feel things she had no business feeling. She chose a simple black dress, elegant but not too formal, and pulled her hair back in a neat bun. Natural makeup. Comfortable heels she could run in, if necessary. Because with Marco Valentino, anything was possible. The restaurant was exclusive, the kind of place that required reservations months in advance. Elizabeth gave Marco's name at the door and was immediately escorted to a private room in the back. Marco stood when she entered, and the sight of him in a perfectly tailored suit stole her breath. He looked dangerous and sophisticated, every inch the powerful man he was. You came, he said, pulling out her chair. I almost didn't. Elizabeth sat, accepting the menu from the server. I spent all day convincing myself this was a terrible idea. Is it? Probably. She met his eyes over the menu. But I'm here anyway. They ordered, and when the server left, Marco leaned back in his chair, studying her. Tell me about yourself, Dr. Monroe. The real you, not the doctor. There's not much to tell. I grew up in Brooklyn, went to Columbia for undergrad and med school, did my residency at Presbyterian. Now I work there full-time. That's your resume, not you. What do you do when you're not saving lives? Elizabeth hesitated. She wasn't used to talking about herself, especially not with someone like Marco. But there was genuine interest in his eyes, not the superficial politeness she usually encountered. I read medical journals mostly, but also fiction when I have time. I volunteer at a free clinic in my old neighborhood twice a month, and I visit my mother every Sunday for dinner. What about friends? Hobbies? A life outside of medicine? Medicine is my life. The words came out more defensive than she'd intended. It has to be. Do you know how many people die every day because they can't afford healthcare? How many kids grow up without parents because of violence and poverty, and all the things that men like you perpetuate? Men like me. Yes, Marco. Men like you. Your world, your business, it destroys communities. It kills innocent people. I've seen it firsthand. Marco's jaw tightened. You think I don't know that? You think I'm proud of what I do. Then why do it? Because it's all I know. Because my father and his father before him built this empire, and when I was 18 years old and watching my father bleed out on our kitchen floor from a rival family's attack, he made me promise to protect what was ours. To keep the family safe. To never show weakness. That's not a reason. That's an excuse. Maybe. But it's my reality. Marco leaned forward, his intensity filling the space between them. You want to know the truth, Elizabeth?
I'm tired.
I'm tired of the violence, the constant looking over my shoulder, the loneliness. I'm tired of women who want the fantasy, but can't handle the reality. I'm tired of being seen as a monster when all I've ever done is survive in a world that wanted me dead. Elizabeth felt her anger soften despite herself. Then change. Walk away. You have money, power, connections. You could leave this life. It's not that simple. There are people who depend on me. Families I'm responsible for. Enemies who would see my exit as an opportunity to tear everything apart. I can't just walk away. You mean you won't? Maybe there's no difference. The food arrived, and they ate in tense silence. Elizabeth knew she should leave, should end this before it started, but she couldn't make herself stand up. Because underneath the Mafia boss was a man who seemed just as trapped as the communities he hurt. A man who looked at her like she was the first real thing he'd encountered in years. I lost someone, Elizabeth said suddenly. 3 years ago. His name was David. We were engaged. He was a teacher at a high school in the Bronx, and he was walking home one night when he got caught in the crossfire of a gang shooting. Wrong place, wrong time. He died before the ambulance even arrived. Marco's face went pale. Elizabeth, I'm sorry. Are you? Because your world, your business, it creates the environment where things like that happen. David was 29 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. We were supposed to get married that summer. Is that why you became a doctor? I was already in med school when it happened. But it's why I work in the ER. Why I volunteer in the worst neighborhoods. Because maybe if I save enough lives, it'll balance out the one I lost. I know it's not rational, but it's all I have. Marco reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused, overwhelming against hers. I can't bring him back. I can't undo what happened to you. But I can promise you that I will never, ever put you in that kind of danger. Not intentionally. You can't promise that, Marco. Just by being here with you, I'm at risk. Then why did you come? Elizabeth looked down at their joined hands, at the way his massive palm engulfed hers, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Because I'm tired too. Tired of being angry all the time. Tired of seeing every patient as a reminder of what I lost. tired of going home to an empty apartment and wondering if this is all there is. It doesn't have to be, doesn't it? What are we doing here, Marco? Playing pretend for one night before reality crashes back in? Maybe. Or maybe we're two lonely people who found each other in the worst possible circumstances and decided to see if there's something worth holding on to. Elizabeth pulled her hand back. I need to think about this. About us. If there even is an us. Take all the time you need. But Elizabeth, I need you to know something. Marco's voice dropped, became more intense. I've been with a lot of women. Beautiful women, successful women, women who wanted me for my money or my power or the thrill of being with someone dangerous. But you're the first woman who's looked at me and seen past all of that. You're the first woman who's challenged me, who's made me want to be better. And I know this is moving fast. I know it's probably a disaster waiting to happen, but I can't ignore it.
Marco.
I'm not asking for forever. I'm just asking for a chance. To see where this goes. To figure out if we're brave enough to try something that shouldn't work, but might anyway. Elizabeth stood, and Marco stood with her. They were close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his massive frame. Every instinct told her to run, to protect herself, to not make the same mistake of loving someone in a dangerous world. But when Marco looked at her like that, like she was the only woman in the universe, those instincts quieted. One more date, she said. And if I sense for even a second that you're trying to control me or put me in danger, I'm done. Clear? Crystal. Marco's smile was genuine, reaching his eyes. Can I drive you home? I'll take a cab. At least let me walk you out. They left the restaurant together, and outside, Elizabeth felt the night air cool against her heated skin. Marco's SUV was parked at the curb, Tony in the driver's seat. But before Elizabeth could hail a cab, shouting erupted from down the block. 4 men appeared, guns drawn, moving fast. Marco's body went rigid, his hand reaching for the weapon Elizabeth suddenly realized he was carrying. Tony was out of the car in seconds, weapon drawn, shouting orders into his phone. Get down. Marco pushed Elizabeth behind him, his massive frame shielding her completely. Tony, get her out of here. But Elizabeth wasn't running. She grabbed Marco's arm. Don't shoot. If you start shooting, innocent people die. If I don't shoot, we die. Then trust me.
Stand down.
All of you, stand down. Elizabeth, what are you doing? She stepped out from behind Marco, hands raised, walking toward the armed men. Marco's shout of her name echoed down the street, but she kept moving. The men stopped, confused, guns still trained on Marco's position. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Monroe, she called out. I work at New York Presbyterian. I'm not armed. I'm not part of this world, and I'm asking you to put your weapons down before someone gets hurt. One of the men, younger than the others, looked uncertain. Lady, get out of the way. This doesn't concern you. It does now. You want Marco Valentino?
Fine.
But I'm not moving until you explain why you're willing to risk your lives and potentially the lives of everyone on this street to get to him. He killed our brother. Did he? Or did your brother make a choice that put him in harm's way? I'm a doctor. I see the aftermath of violence every single day. I see families destroyed, kids growing up without parents, communities torn apart. And for what? Territory?
Pride?
Money? None of it's worth it. You don't understand. You're right, I don't. But I understand that if you pull those triggers, you're going to prison for the rest of your lives. I understand that your families will suffer. I understand that the cycle continues, more death, more violence, more pain. And I'm tired of it. Aren't you? The young man's gun wavered. Behind her, Elizabeth could feel Marco's presence, tense and ready, but he wasn't shooting. He was letting her try. The silence stretched, every second feeling like an eternity, until finally, the young man lowered his weapon. This isn't over, Valentino. It could be, Marco said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. You want peace? I'll give you peace. I'll compensate your family for their loss. Set them up legitimately. But only if you walk away now and end this vendetta. The men looked at each other, uncertain. Finally, the young man nodded. We'll think about it. They disappeared into the night, and Elizabeth's legs gave out. Marco caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. What the hell were you thinking? I was thinking that more death wouldn't solve anything. You could have been killed. So could you. Elizabeth looked up at him, seeing fear in his eyes, real fear, and realized he cared about her more than she'd thought possible after one dinner. Put me down, Marco.
Ai fine.
He set her on her feet, but didn't let go. His hands on her arms were trembling slightly, and she realized the great Marco Valentino was shaken. Don't ever do that again. I can't promise that, Elizabeth. You wanted to know the real me? That's who I am. I don't run from danger, I run toward it. I save lives, Marco. Even the lives of people who probably don't deserve saving. Even yours. Marco stared at her for a long moment, and then he did something Elizabeth didn't expect. He laughed, a deep, genuine sound that transformed his entire face. You're insane. Probably. You're also the bravest woman I've ever met. Or the stupidest. Both. Marco pulled her close, and Elizabeth let herself lean into his massive frame, feeling safe despite the danger they'd just faced. Let me take you home.
Please.
I need to know you're safe. Elizabeth nodded, too exhausted to argue. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaky and tired. Marco guided her to the SUV, and she slid into the back seat while he joined her. Tony drove in silence, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror at his boss. Where do you live? Marco asked. Elizabeth gave him her address, and they drove through the quiet streets of New York. Marco didn't let go of her hand the entire ride. When they arrived at her apartment building in Brooklyn, a modest walk-up in a working-class neighborhood, Marco looked around with obvious concern. This neighborhood isn't safe. It's my neighborhood. I grew up 3 blocks from here.
Still.
I don't like it. Good thing it's not your decision. Elizabeth opened the door and climbed out. Thank you for dinner, Marco. Despite the excitement at the end, I actually had a nice time. So did I. Marco followed her to the building's entrance. Second date? Please tell me I get a second date after you nearly gave me a heart attack. Next Friday. Same time. But Marco, somewhere less public. Somewhere we can actually talk without worrying about who's watching. My penthouse. I'll cook. You cook. My Nonna taught me. Best Italian food you'll ever have, I promise. Elizabeth smiled despite herself. Okay, but just dinner. And if you try anything... I'm a gentleman, Dr. Monroe. Mostly. His grin was wicked. Besides, after tonight, I'm pretty sure you could take me in a fight. Don't doubt it. Elizabeth stood on her toes and, before she could second-guess herself, pressed a quick kiss to Marco's cheek. Good night, Marco. She disappeared into her building before he could respond, her heart racing. From her third-floor window, she watched as Marco stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, one hand touching the spot where she'd kissed him, before finally climbing back into the SUV and driving away. Elizabeth leaned against her door and closed her eyes. What was she doing? Getting involved with a man like Marco Valentino was beyond stupid. It was dangerous, reckless, potentially deadly. But when she'd stood in front of those guns, all she could think about was keeping him safe. And that meant something. It meant she was already in too deep to turn back now. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Marco's number. Thank you for tonight. For everything. You're extraordinary, Elizabeth Monroe. Sleep well. She didn't respond. Couldn't respond. Because if she started texting him, she'd have to acknowledge what was happening between them, and she wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, she got ready for bed and tried to ignore the fact that for the first time in 3 years, she was looking forward to tomorrow. The week crawled by. Elizabeth threw herself into work, treating gunshot wounds and stab victims and overdoses, all the casualties of the world Marco inhabited. But she couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he'd looked at her during dinner, about how he'd shielded her body with his own without hesitation, about the loneliness she'd seen in his eyes that matched her own. Friday arrived faster and slower than she wanted. Elizabeth changed after her shift, choosing jeans and a simple blouse, casual and comfortable. She'd never been to Marco's penthouse, but she'd looked up the address. It was in one of the most expensive buildings in Manhattan, the kind of place she'd never be able to afford on a doctor's salary. Tony picked her up at 6:30, professional and courteous. "Boss is nervous," he said with a smile. Never seen him nervous before.
Good.
He should be. The penthouse was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, and the space was decorated with expensive but tasteful furniture that somehow managed to feel lived in rather than sterile. Marco was in the kitchen, wearing jeans and a simple black t-shirt that stretched across his massive chest, and the sight of him in casual clothes did things to Elizabeth's pulse she didn't want to examine. "You're here," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I said I would be." Elizabeth walked to the windows, taking in the view. "This is beautiful, Marco." "It's just a place. Doesn't mean much when you're living in it alone." He returned to the stove, stirring something that smelled incredible. "I'm making my Nona's recipe. Homemade pasta with bolognese sauce. Hope you're hungry." "Starving." Elizabeth watched him cook, fascinated by the way his massive hands moved with surprising delicacy. "You really do cook." "Told you." My Nona believed that a man who couldn't feed himself was useless. She made sure all her grandsons knew their way around a kitchen. "Tell me about her." Marco's face softened. "She's 87, stubborn as hell, and the only person in the world I'm actually afraid of. She came to America from Sicily with nothing but the clothes on her back and my grandfather's name. They built a life here, raised 5 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment, and never complained once. She taught me that family is everything, that loyalty matters more than money, and that a real man protects the people he loves." "She sounds amazing."
She is.
"She's also dying." Marco's voice caught slightly.
Cancer.
"The doctors give her maybe 6 months. Her one wish before she goes is to see me settled, happy, with someone who actually cares about me and not just what I can give them." Elizabeth moved closer, drawn by the pain in his voice. "I'm sorry, Marco." "She'd love you, you know. Nona always said I needed a woman who wasn't afraid to tell me when I'm being an idiot." He plated the pasta, the movements automatic. "Come on, let's eat before it gets cold." They sat at his dining table, the city spread out below them like a carpet of lights. The food was incredible, rich and flavorful, and Elizabeth found herself relaxing despite the strange circumstances. Marco was easy to talk to when he wasn't being the intimidating mafia boss, and they fell into conversation that ranged from childhood memories to favorite books to ridiculous hospital stories. "So you're telling me," Marco said, laughing, "that someone actually came into your R with a cucumber stuckware?" "I am not repeating that. Patient confidentiality." Elizabeth grinned. "But let's just say it was a very awkward Tuesday." "Medicine sounds more interesting than I thought. It has its moments." Elizabeth took another bite, savoring the taste. "This is delicious, Marco. Your Nona taught you well." "Wait until you try dessert. I made tiramisu." "You made tiramisu? From scratch? Is there any other way?" Marco stood, clearing their plates. "But first, I want to show you something." He led her through the penthouse to a door she hadn't noticed before. When he opened it, Elizabeth gasped. The room was a library, walls lined with books from floor to ceiling, comfortable chairs positioned near the windows, and soft lighting that made the space feel warm and inviting. "I thought you said you were just a dumb gangster," Elizabeth said, running her fingers along the spines of the books. "I never said that. Other people assume it." Marco watched her explore, his expression unreadable. My father believed that power came from knowledge as much as force. He made sure I was educated, that I understood history and philosophy and literature. Said that a leader who only knows how to fight will eventually be outsmarted by someone who knows how to think. Elizabeth pulled out a worn copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. This was my favorite growing up. Mine too. Read it 6 times. She turned to face him, the book clutched to her chest. Who are you, Marco Valentino? Really? I'm a man trying to figure out how to live with the choices he's made. I'm someone who was born into a world he didn't choose and is trying to find a way to change it without destroying everything in the process. I'm lonely as hell, tired of pretending to be something I'm not, and completely fascinated by a woman who walked into my life and turned everything upside down. Elizabeth set the book down carefully. I'm scared, Marco. Of me. Of this. Of what I feel when I'm with you. Of the fact that I spent 3 years mourning someone I lost to violence, and now I'm standing in a Mafia boss's penthouse falling for him despite every rational thought in my head. Marco closed the distance between them slowly, giving her time to move away. When she didn't, he cupped her face in his massive hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. I'm scared too. Because every woman I've been with has run when things got real, when they realized what being with me actually meant. And you, Elizabeth, you're the first woman I've met who I think might actually be strong enough to handle it. But I'm terrified that I'll be the one who breaks you. You won't. How can you be sure? Because I'm not breakable, Marco. I've already survived the worst thing I can imagine. Anything else is just noise. He kissed her then, and Elizabeth felt the world tilt. His lips were soft despite his hard exterior, his kiss gentle despite his size, and she melted into him. Marco's arms came around her, engulfing her, and she'd never felt so safe and so reckless at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marco rested his forehead against hers.
Stay. Please.
Not just stay.
Talk to me.
Let me hold you. I just want you close. Elizabeth knew she should say no. Knew that staying would cross a line they couldn't uncross. But she found herself nodding. Okay. But Marco, we're taking this slow. I need time to process what this is, what it means. We'll go as slow as you need. They returned to the living room, and Marco put on music, old jazz that filled the space with warmth. They talked for hours, sitting close on his couch, Marco's arm around her shoulders, Elizabeth curled into his side. They talked about everything and nothing, about dreams and regrets and fears and hopes. What do you want, Elizabeth? Marco asked as midnight approached. If you could have anything in the world, what would it be? Elizabeth thought about it. I want to make a difference. Real, lasting difference. I want to open a clinic in my old neighborhood, somewhere people can get quality healthcare regardless of whether they can pay. I want to save lives and train the next generation of doctors and maybe, someday, fall asleep next to someone who loves me as much as I love them. That's a good dream. What about you? What does Marco Valentino want? Marco was quiet for a long moment. I want out. Not completely. I can't abandon the people who depend on me. But I want to transition the family business into something legitimate. Real estate, restaurants, legal enterprises. I want to be someone my Nona can be proud of before she dies. And I want to wake up next to a woman who sees me, really sees me, and doesn't run. That's a good dream, too. Think we can make them come true? Elizabeth looked up at him, at the vulnerability in his eyes, and made a decision. I think we can try. Marco's smile was brilliant. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, soft touches that made her feel cherished rather than possessed. Stay tonight. In the guest room. I just want to know you're here, safe. Okay. He showed her to a guest suite that was bigger than her entire apartment, gave her one of his t-shirts to sleep in, and left her with a lingering kiss that promised everything and demanded nothing. Elizabeth changed and climbed into bed, surrounded by luxury she'd never experienced, and felt her phone buzz. "Good night, Elizabeth. Thank you for giving me a chance."
Marco.
She smiled and typed back.
Good night, Marco.
"Don't make me regret this." "Never." "Sleep well, beautiful." Elizabeth fell asleep thinking about impossible possibilities and woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She found Marco in the kitchen, cooking breakfast in the same t-shirt and jeans from the night before, his hair slightly mussed, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "Morning," he said, his smile warm. "I made breakfast. Hope you like pancakes." "I love pancakes." Elizabeth accepted the coffee he poured, rich and perfect. "You know, for a terrifying mafia boss, you're surprisingly domestic." "Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my reputation." They ate together, and Elizabeth felt something settle in her chest. This could work. Maybe.
Possibly.
If they were both brave enough and careful enough, and willing to fight for it. "I have to go to work," she said reluctantly after they'd finished. "Shift starts at noon. I'll have Tony drive you." "Marco, I can take the subway." "Humor me. Please. After what happened last week, I need to know you're safe." Elizabeth wanted to argue, but she saw the genuine concern in his eyes and relented.
Fine.
"But this doesn't become a regular thing. I'm not giving up my independence." "Wouldn't dream of asking you to." Tony drove her home, and Elizabeth spent the rest of the weekend catching up on laundry and paperwork and trying to process what was happening in her life. Monday arrived with a triple trauma and a 16-hour shift that left her exhausted. She stumbled home at 2 a.m. to find a package outside her door. Inside was a book, a first edition of The Count of Monte Cristo, and a note in Marco's bold handwriting. "Thought you might like this. Also, there's something I need to tell you. Call me when you can."
M.
Elizabeth called immediately, worry overriding exhaustion. Marco answered on the first ring. "Elizabeth, you okay?"
I've fine.
"What's wrong?" Your note sounded serious.
Marco Said.
"There's a situation. The Russo family, they're one of our biggest rivals. Their boss, Vincent Russo, he's been trying to move into our territory for years. Last week, when those men came after me, that was his doing. And now he's pushing harder, trying to start a war." "What does that mean for you?" "It means things are about to get dangerous. More dangerous than usual. And I need you to know that, need you to understand what you're getting into if we keep doing this." "Are you trying to scare me off?" "I'm trying to be honest with you. You deserve that." Elizabeth sat down on her couch, suddenly too tired to stand. "Marco, I appreciate the honesty. But I'm a trauma surgeon in an ER. I deal with dangerous situations every day. I'm not some delicate flower who needs protection from reality. I know that. But this is different. If Vincent finds out about you, if he realizes you matter to me, he'll use that. He'll target you to get to me. Then we'll be careful. But Marco, I'm not walking away because things might get complicated. I've already lost someone I loved to violence. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life afraid of what might happen." "You're incredible, you know that?" "I've been told." Elizabeth smiled despite her exhaustion. "What's the plan?" "I'm meeting with Vincent next week. Neutral territory. I'm going to try to negotiate peace, or at least a ceasefire. But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll be careful. That you'll let Tony or one of my men keep an eye on you, just until this is settled."
Marco.
"Please, Elizabeth. I can't focus on this meeting if I'm worried about your safety." Elizabeth wanted to argue, but she heard the genuine fear in his voice.
Fine.
"But only until this meeting is done. And your men stay out of sight. I'm not having armed guards following me around the hospital."
Deal.
"Thank you." They talked for another hour, about nothing and everything, until Elizabeth's eyes were drooping. Marco made her promise to call him the next day, and she fell asleep with her phone still in her hand. The next week was tense. Elizabeth felt eyes on her constantly, though she never saw Marco's men. She went to work, came home, occasionally met Marco for quiet dinners in his penthouse where they could be alone. They talked and laughed and kissed, but there was an undercurrent of tension, the knowledge that something was coming. The meeting with Vincent Russo was set for Friday night at an abandoned church in Brooklyn, neutral territory where neither family had advantage. Marco was calm when he told her, but Elizabeth saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand kept moving to where his weapon was concealed. "I don't like this," she said Thursday night, curled up next to him on his couch. "Neither do I. But it's necessary. If we can avoid a war, we have to try." "What if it's a trap? Then I'll deal with it. This is my world, Elizabeth. I know how to navigate it. That doesn't mean I have to like it." Marco pulled her closer, his massive frame wrapping around her protectively. "After this is done, after we settle this situation with Vincent, I'm taking you somewhere. Somewhere far from the city and the business and all of this.
Just you and me for a weekend.
What do you say?" "I say that sounds perfect." Friday arrived too fast. Elizabeth worked her shift in a daze, distracted and worried in a way that made her supervisor pull her aside. "Dr. Monroe, is everything okay? You seem off today."
I've fine.
"Just personal stuff. If you need to talk."
I've fine.
"Really?" But she wasn't fine. All day, she felt a growing sense of dread, like something terrible was about to happen. She called Marco 3 times, and each time he assured her everything was under control, that she shouldn't worry, that he'd see her tomorrow. The meeting was set for 8 o'clock. At 7:45, Elizabeth made a decision that would change everything. She called Tony. "Tony, where's the meeting?" "Dr. Monroe, the boss said you weren't supposed to know." "Tony, please. I need to be there." "That's a really bad idea." "I don't care. Tell me where, or I'll find out another way." Tony gave her the address, and Elizabeth grabbed her coat and ran. She caught a cab, urging the driver to hurry, her heart pounding with fear she couldn't name. The church was in an industrial area, isolated and dark, and when she arrived, she saw 24 SUVs parked outside. She was too late. The meeting had already started. Elizabeth ran into the church and stopped dead. 50 armed men filled the space, 25 on each side, weapons drawn but not yet fired. Marco stood in the center, facing a man who must have been Vincent Russo, both of them radiating tension. And off to the side she saw it. One of Vincent's men, young and scared, his finger tightening on the trigger, aimed directly at Marco's back. Elizabeth didn't think. She ran into the center of the room, putting herself between Marco and the gun. The shouting started immediately, Marco's voice loudest of all, fear and fury mixed together. But Elizabeth raised her hands and spoke with every ounce of authority she possessed. "Nobody shoots." The room fell silent. Every gun was trained on her now, and Elizabeth felt the weight of all those potential deaths pressing down on her. But she didn't move. "You want a war? Fine. Kill each other. But know this, you're fighting the wrong enemy. Every bullet you fire, every life you take, it doesn't just affect you. It destroys families. It traumatizes communities. It perpetuates a cycle of violence that will consume your children and your children's children. I'm a doctor. I see the aftermath of your decisions every single day. And I'm telling you, as someone who's held the hand of dying men while they begged me to tell their mothers they were sorry, as someone who's watched kids come in with gunshot wounds and known they'll never walk again, as someone who lost the man she loved to this same senseless violence, it's not worth it. None of it is worth it." Vincent Russo stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Lady, who the hell are you?" "I'm Dr. Elizabeth Monroe. I'm nobody important, nobody involved in your world. But I'm standing here anyway, because I care about that man." She pointed at Marco. "And I'm asking you, begging you, to find another way. You think you're strong because you can pull a trigger? Real strength is walking away. Real power is choosing peace when war would be easier. You've got guts, I'll give you that." Vincent looked at Marco. "This your woman, Valentino?" "Yes," Marco said, his voice rough with emotion. She is. Then you're either the luckiest man alive or the stupidest, bringing her into this. I didn't bring her. She came on her own. Vincent laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the church. I came here tonight ready to start a war. Ready to take everything you've built, Valentino. But your woman here, she's got me thinking. My daughter, she's about to graduate medical school. Wants to be a doctor just like you, Dr. Monroe. And I look at you, standing here facing down 50 armed men without flinching, and I think about her doing something that brave someday. And I think about how I'd feel if someone like me put her in danger because of a stupid territorial dispute. Vincent, one of his men, said, "We came here for blood. I know what we came for. But maybe the doctor's right. Maybe we're fighting the wrong enemy." Vincent looked at Marco. "You want peace, Valentino? I'll give you peace. But there are conditions." "Name them." "The docks. You've controlled them for 20 years. I want a 40-60 split. You keep the majority, but my family gets a legitimate piece. And any business that comes through goes through proper channels. No more drugs, no more weapons. Clean money only." Marco was quiet for a moment, calculating. Then he nodded.
Deal.
"But I have conditions too. We work together to clean up the neighborhoods we control. Fund community centers, job programs, get the kids off the streets. We use our resources to build instead of destroy." "You've been talking to your woman too much, Valentino. You're going soft." "Maybe. But I'm also still standing, which is more than most men who go up against the Valentino family can say. Do we have a deal or not?" Vincent extended his hand. "We have a deal." The two men shook, and the tension in the room evaporated. Men lowered their weapons, started talking, some even laughing with relief. And Elizabeth, who'd been running on pure adrenaline, felt her legs give out. Marco caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her into his arms like she weighed nothing. "What the hell were you thinking?" he demanded, carrying her out of the church into the cool night air. "I was thinking that I wasn't going to let you die. You could have been killed, Elizabeth. Do you understand that? Every gun in that room was pointed at you." "I know. But it worked, didn't it?" Marco set her down on the hood of his SUV, his hands shaking as they framed her face. "Don't you ever do something like that again. I can't, Elizabeth, I can't lose you. When I saw you standing there, I aged 20 years. Now you know how I felt watching you walk into a room with 25 armed enemies. That's different."
How?
"Because you're a big tough mafia boss and I'm just a doctor." Elizabeth grabbed his shirt, pulling him closer. "Listen to me, Marco Valentino. I don't need you to protect me from your world. I need you to let me stand beside you in it. I'm not some fragile thing that needs to be locked away for safekeeping. I'm strong enough to handle this, handle you, handle all of it. But only if you trust me." Marco kissed her then, desperate and deep, pouring every ounce of fear and relief and love he couldn't yet say into the kiss. Elizabeth kissed him back just as desperately, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for a moment, nothing else existed except the two of them. When they finally broke apart, Marco rested his forehead against hers. "Move in with me." "What?" "Move in with me. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but I can't do this anymore, Elizabeth. I can't watch you walk away every night wondering if you'll be safe. I can't sleep in that huge penthouse alone knowing you're across the city in an apartment with broken locks in a neighborhood where anything could happen.
Move in with me.
Let me keep you safe. Let me wake up next to you. Let me fall asleep holding you. Please." Elizabeth knew she should say no. It was too fast, too intense, too everything. But when she looked at Marco, at the vulnerability and hope and love in his eyes, she found herself nodding. Okay. Yes, Marco. I'll move in with you. But we're doing this right. We're taking time to actually know each other, we're setting boundaries, and you're going to respect my independence. Anything you want. Everything you want." Marco kissed her again, softer this time. Thank you. For tonight, for every night, for giving me a chance when you should have run the other way. I don't run, Marco. Thought you would have figured that out by now. Tony appeared, grinning. Boss, Vincent wants to know if you and your woman want to grab drinks to celebrate. Says his treat. Marco looked at Elizabeth and she laughed. Why not? I've already had the most insane night of my life. Might as well keep the momentum going. They went to a bar Vincent owned, and Elizabeth found herself sitting between two Mafia bosses, listening to them argue about construction contracts and community programs like they were discussing the weather. Vincent's men and Marco's men mingled awkwardly at first, then gradually relaxed, sharing war stories and jokes. You're good for him, Vincent said to Elizabeth quietly while Marco was at the bar getting more drinks. I've known Valentino for 20 years, and I've never seen him like this. Lighter. More human. He's always been human. He just didn't have anyone who saw it. Maybe. But you do. And word of advice, Dr. Monroe, keep doing what you did tonight. Keep challenging him. Keep pushing him to be better. Men like us, we need that. We need someone brave enough to tell us when we're being idiots. Trust me, I plan to. Marco returned with drinks, and the night continued. Elizabeth found herself genuinely enjoying the company of people she should probably hate, seeing past the criminals to the humans underneath. They were fathers and brothers and sons, men who'd made choices she disagreed with, but who also had the capacity for change. It was past 3 a.m. when Marco finally drove Elizabeth home, both of them exhausted but happy. He walked her to her door, kissed her goodnight, and promised to be back in the morning to help her start packing. I love you, he said suddenly. I know it's too soon, I know I shouldn't say it yet, but I do. I love you, Elizabeth Monroe. Elizabeth's breath caught. She looked up at him, at this massive, complicated man who'd turned her world upside down, and felt her heart expand. I love you too, Marco. God help me, I love you too. His smile was brilliant. He kissed her one more time, then forced himself to leave. Elizabeth watched him go, then went inside and collapsed on her couch. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. Can't stop smiling. Can't wait for tomorrow. Can't believe I get to keep you.
M.
Elizabeth smiled and typed back. I'm not a possession to be kept, Valentino.
But you do get to love me.
And I get to love you back. See you tomorrow. She fell asleep smiling, thinking about impossible love stories and happy endings that shouldn't work, but somehow did. The next few weeks were chaos. Elizabeth moved into Marco's penthouse bit by bit, balancing her shifts at the hospital with building a life with the man she loved. They argued and laughed and learned each other's rhythms. Marco learned to give her space when she needed it, and Elizabeth learned to let him take care of her in the ways that mattered to him. Marco started following through on his promises to Vincent. He began transitioning the family business into legitimate enterprises, using his resources to fund community programs and create jobs in the neighborhoods his family had once exploited. It wasn't easy, and there was resistance from the old guard, but Marco was determined. Elizabeth met his Nona 3 weeks after moving in, and the old woman took one look at her and started crying. Finally, she said in Italian-accented English, pulling Elizabeth into a fierce hug. Finally, my boy brings home a real woman. Not one of those plastic girls, but someone with fire in her eyes and strength in her soul. Nona, you're embarrassing me, Marco said, but his smile was warm.
Good.
You should be embarrassed, making me wait so long to meet her. Nona held Elizabeth at arm's length, studying her. You love him.
I do.
And you're not afraid of him? No, ma'am. Good. He needs that. He needs someone who sees past the monster everyone thinks he is to the good man underneath. Nona looked at Marco. You marry this one, Marco. You marry her before I die, you hear me? I want to see you happy before I go. I will, Nona. I promise. Elizabeth's heart stuttered, but she said nothing. They hadn't talked about marriage, hadn't even been together 2 months. But looking at Marco's face, at the love and certainty there, she realized they didn't need to talk about it. They both already knew. 2 months later, Marco surprised her. Not with a proposal, but with something better. He took her to a building in her old neighborhood in Brooklyn, a 3-story structure that had been abandoned for years. "What is this?" Elizabeth asked. "It's yours." "Well, it will be once the renovations are done. I bought it last month and hired contractors to turn it into a medical clinic. The Elizabeth Monroe Community Health Center. Free health care for anyone who needs it, funded by the Valentino Family Foundation. Which is real and legitimate and totally above board, by the way." Elizabeth stared at the building, then at Marco, then started crying. He panicked, pulling her close. "If you don't like it, we can do something else, we can?" "Shut up, Marco. I love it. I love you. This is the most incredible gift anyone's ever given me. You're the incredible one. I'm just trying to keep up." 6 months after they met, Marco proposed. Not with a big production or public display, but quietly, in their penthouse, while they were cooking dinner together. He got down on one knee right there in the kitchen, this massive man folding himself down to look up at her with love and hope in his eyes. "Marry me, Elizabeth. Make me the luckiest man alive. Let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Marco, I'll marry you." They were married 3 months later in a small ceremony with Nona present, tears streaming down her face. Vincent Russo came, surprisingly, bringing his daughter who Elizabeth had befriended. Tony was Marco's best man, and Elizabeth's mother cried through the entire ceremony. "I wasn't sure about him," her mother admitted at the reception. "But I see the way he looks at you, baby girl. Like you hung the stars. That's real love." "It is, Mama. It really is." Marco swept her onto the dance floor, and Elizabeth laid her head against his chest, feeling his heart beating steady and strong. "I love you, Mrs. Valentino," he whispered against her hair. "I love you too, Mr. Valentino. Thank you for not being someone I could handle easily, for being too much and too intense and too everything. Thank you for being you. Thank you for seeing me, the real me, and for not running when you should have. I told you I don't run. I stand and fight. You do. You really do." Marco lifted her chin, kissing her softly. "I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you, to build something real and good and beautiful together." "Neither can I." And they did. Elizabeth's clinic opened and became a cornerstone of the community. Marco continued transitioning the family business, facing resistance and setbacks, but never giving up. They fought and loved and built a life that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. Nona lived to see their first anniversary and to meet her first great-grandchild, a daughter they named Isabella. She passed peacefully in her sleep 6 weeks later, a smile on her face, finally at peace knowing her Marco was happy. The story could have ended tragically. Should have ended with Elizabeth running or Marco falling back into old patterns or the violence of his world tearing them apart. But instead, it ended with hope, with change, with proof that love can transform even the darkest circumstances if both people are brave enough to fight for it. 5 years later, Elizabeth stood in her clinic, treating patients and training new doctors, while Marco worked in his office upstairs, managing the legitimate businesses that now funded community programs across the city. Their daughter played in the waiting room, charming everyone she met, and another child was on the way. "Dr. Monroe?" A young woman approached, nervous. "I just wanted to say thank you. I grew up in this neighborhood, and I never thought I'd become a doctor. But seeing what you've built here, seeing what's possible, it inspired me. I start medical school next month." Elizabeth smiled, thinking about a night 5 years ago when she'd stood in an abandoned church facing down 50 armed men and choosing love over fear. "You're welcome. And remember, you're stronger than you think." Don't ever let anyone tell you what you can't handle. The young woman left, and Marco appeared, wrapping his arms around Elizabeth from behind, his hand settling over her growing belly. Proud of you, he murmured against her neck. Right back at you. Elizabeth turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd stolen her heart against all odds. Love you, Marco. Love you more, Elizabeth. Thank you for being brave enough to handle me. Thank you for being worth handling. They kissed there in the clinic hallway, surrounded by the community they helped rebuild, living proof that no woman could handle the Mafia boss's size, his intensity, his world, until one black woman did the unthinkable. She didn't just handle it. She transformed it. She transformed him. And together, they transformed their world. If you've made it this far in the story, I hope it inspired you to believe in second chances and the power of love to change lives. Hit that subscribe button if you want more incredible stories like this. Drop a comment below telling me what you thought of Elizabeth and Marco's journey, and give this video a thumbs up to help others find this story. Thank you for listening, and remember, you're stronger than you think you are.
Thank you for watching to the end. Do you enjoy the story? If you do so, please subscribe to my channel, like, and then drop the thoughts in the comment section. Also, tell us where you are watching from. This is very, very important. Thank you so much. And you can check my channel for more interesting videos like this. Thank you for listening to my story.